My name is Philip Brown. I'm a retired mechanical engineer. I'm still active as a Labour Party member, and I'm still active as a trade unionist. At the moment, obviously as a retired person, you get to do all the things that you weren't able to do when you were working, and my current projects include trying to get a Momentum group active in Watford, and also a Left Book Club readers group. Actually, I've enjoyed looking back through these papers that I managed to dig out of the loft, because it's brought back a lot of memories and feelings that you tend to, in life passes you so quickly that you tend to dismiss. But back in 1984, I was a mechanical design engineer. I was working for a company called Marconi Underwater Systems Limited in Wembley in North London. I was associated with the Linton Labour Party because I was born and brought up locally, and I had joined the Linton Labour Party in 1968 as an enthusiastic teenager. And the good friends and colleagues that I met during that time, I remained in touch with on a regular basis. So also in my work, I was by then a shop steward, which within the TAS union that I was a member of were called corresponding members, and we at that time were still obliged to go around and collect union subs from our members on a monthly basis in cash, and it was my job to, the main job was to put the money in the bank. So when the miners' strike started, it was a very important time because I've been politically active for many years. I was obviously keen on developments, and the election of Margaret Thatcher was a turning point because her economic policies were so dramatically different from anything that the Tories have ever done before. And it was very obvious that she was going to be a revolutionary in terms. Back in those days, we have to remember that the miners were quite a force within the Labour movement. Union membership as a whole was more than double what it is now. And there was a very different industrial relations atmosphere. I mean, strikes were very common in those days, which we can't appreciate today because they more or less don't happen. So by the time that the miners had got to the stage of calling a strike in March of 1984, it was very obvious that that was going to be a significant industrial action. And what we didn't know entirely at the time, and it's only sort of creeping out now, is that Thatcher had made several years' preparations. Actually, I did look at one statistic after the strike. If you look at the coal stocks at power stations, etc., the statistic or line is whatever value sort of meanders along at a very low level. But in 1983, there was an absolutely enormous strike. It was factors of magnitude more than ever. So just that one statistic on its own told me that there was a bit of planning that went into this industrial dispute. And so as a trade unionist and a socialist, it was a very important event to me. It was very obvious that Thatcher had to, for her project to work, had to squash the organised working labour movement. And this was one of the projects that she had going. So in the early days of the strike, and as labour groups and others got together to start supporting the miners, it became, we in Linton thought that we needed to do our bit. And we had, I should say that the Linton group was led by the branch, Labour Party branch secretary, Eileen Tolman. We had a treasurer, Harold Mallion, whose wife was a northern lady. And she came from a little town called Chapeltown, just north of Sheffield. And it happened that her cousin was married to a miner. And so we encouraged her to get in touch with her family and make arrangements for us to contact them and make our donations through them. And all that arrangement was sorted out, and by early August in 1984, we took our first carload of food up to Chapeltown. Now, that was myself, Eileen, Jenny, and our branch chairman, John Hagger. We arrived at Jenny's relations and said hello, and they redirected us to a miner called Tommy Wilson, who was the NUM branch delegate for the Kingsley Drift pit. We spent the rest of the day with Tommy and his wife Joy. They looked after us very well. They were very appreciative of our support, and in fact they took us in the evening to the local working men's club where Tommy was the treasurer. We met some NACODS members. We obviously discussed all aspects of the strike, and we agreed that, and when we left in the early hours of the morning, Sunday morning, we agreed to make further visits, further contact and further support. At the time, I drew up a diagram for anyone that wanted to visit our miners, as they came to be known, which shows the contact Tommy Wilson that we first made, and there was another miner called Eddie Facey over in Fitzwilliam, which was the village right next to the pit. Actually, it's called Kingsley. The pit was called Kingsley Drift. There were two villages absolutely adjacent. Fitzwilliam was the original mining village, and a more modern one had been Kingsley. So we made those contacts, and we exchanged a number of letters. This is the letter of thanks that Tommy sent us shortly after our visit. I've got drafts of the letters that we sent to them, and this was the official. When the branch secretary of Kingsley Drift got to know of our donation, he sent an official NUM response, and that's dated August the 12th. So by the beginning of August, we were established with this group of miners. Now, over the period of the next few months, we had exchange visits, and we got to know a small group of them very well. In the run-up to the Christmas period, we wanted to give the children of the families at the Kingsley Drift pit some sort of Christmas, so we made special efforts to raise money and etc. for a Christmas party, which was run at the pit welfare social club, which was the miners obviously did all the organisation. We provided some of the funding and other bits and pieces, and it went ahead on December the 15th, which was a Saturday. A number of us travelled up, several carloads travelled up to be at the party, including Barbara. And during the party, presentations were made. Now, for the core group that we were, the gentlemen received NUM ties, and the ladies received little miners' lamps, some on a key ring, and I think some were the little miniature ones. Now, we weren't the only ones supporting Kingsley Drift. I did have this is a circular from the National Union of Journalists, and they were also supporting Kingsley Drift. So there were more than just our input that was going into that pit. And while we were at the party, there happened to be Norwegian journalists there also. But I met an elderly miner. We'd never met before, didn't meet him before or since. But he gave it to me, but he gave it to the group, the Linton group, in appreciation of their support for the pit. This must have been what the miners received. It's marked the Rockingham Colliery, which had closed some years before, 1979, it says on the side here. So it must have been a memento that he was given as a miner when he left that pit and came to Kingsley Drift, and he passed it on to us as a thank you for our support to his group. Where we were in the Miners' Welfare Club, just opposite there was a picket hut, and this is a reference of a number of group of miners. The only one we did meet one or two of these people, but the one we got to know most was the chap in the middle here, Gary Deakin, who comes into the story later on. By Christmas and early New Year 1985, the miners were obviously having a hard time, and they thought they would like to try and expand their money raising efforts, so they had thoughts of going down to London, because that seemed to be paved with gold. And so we at Linton wrote on their behalf to Ken Livingstone. Ken replied saying, come down, more or less, come down and see what you can do. In further efforts to increase our income, I started, with the help of the Labour group, a club. It was called, I called it the Drifters Club. And I spent the January designing a number of bits and pieces for the club. And the deal was that we were going to sign up members and charge them £2 a month, £24 a year, and £960 for life. I think, but no one actually took us up on that. But we did, in the short time that it was going, we did recruit 14 paying members. And the idea was that I was going to produce a newsletter, which this is the one and only. We never got past the first edition because it ran out of time. The Barnsley Miners' Wives Group did give us a signed copy of a book to auction. We never got round to doing that because it arrived too late, but there were, and that was a feature, I think, of the strike. The way that the women supported the strike was quite remarkable, especially given that the macho image that the miners tended to project. Actually, we found out when we got to know them that in the same way that we soft Southerners weren't quite up to scratch, those sort of images weren't entirely accurate. They were very, very committed. They had an attitude that we've totally lost now of a commitment to each other, to their community, to a way of life that they had known from generations, and it's significant. I mean, the strike was about jobs and communities, but when it got towards the end of the strike in March of '85, it was clear that there was going to be some sort of settlement. The strike actually finished on the 3rd of March, and the Kingsley Drift miners were due to go back in to work on the 7th of March. So Eileen and I drove up or during the night that day, or early morning that day. We arrived in Chapeltown about 6 o'clock in the morning. We went over to Kingsley Drift for what was meant to be a 7 o'clock march in, and it didn't happen. What had occurred in the meantime is that the Kent miners had a problem. They remained on strike, and they'd sent a picket to Kingsley Drift, and the men obviously weren't going to cross the picket line, so they didn't actually march in that day. It wasn't until the 9th of March that they actually went back to work. We remained in contact with the miners from that time. We became not just comrades in struggle then, we became socially as friends. They came down to us, and they visited around East Anglia, and we took them down to London. It was just like an ordinary any other sort of social engagement. But as it progressed through 1985, the government policy was to make all pits economic, so each pit had to be judged for its economic viability, and Kingsley Drift was put into that process quite early on. And by the beginning of 1986, it was pretty clear that they were going to be closed, because the government figures could be shown that they weren't viable anymore.